What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Gudafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. Thanks for tuning in. If you're watching us on Iconic or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate the support. Can't do the show without the help of our sponsors. My Patriot Supply has been nice enough to work with us to create a program that will get you $100 off a 4-week supply for their products. Just go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com, and through that site you'll be able to take a look at their emergency survival food. They have long-term, short-term fruits and vegetable kits, meats and proteins, survival items, water, fitness. They've got all kinds of stuff. And let's be honest, if 2020 hasn't gotten you thinking about preparing for darker times, well, then you might need to have your head examined. So take a check at preparewithmacroaggressions.com. Get $100 off a 4-week supply. It's worth it. Be prepared. And we're going to need it, aren't we? My guest is Jason Bassler. He knows a thing or two. You know, I've been thrown off of Twitter, and I've been in Facebook jail 4 times, but I think they named the Facebook jail after you. I mean, you've been thrown off of there. I don't know how. I'm on the Free Thought Project number 4 and Policing the Police number 3, I think. I don't know. How you doing? First of all, hi. How are you? How you doing?
Hey, Charlie. I'm doing fine, man. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm glad to have you on because there's nobody that, I mean, your stuff has been, you know, I thought I knew a lot about police brutality and sort of the problems that we face with that. But for the last couple of years, I've been following your work, and I've really gotten it doesn't come across as being like you have an axe to grind with the police necessarily. It's very objective. Your information seems very honest and objective, and it's like you're just kind of putting it out there. And if you happen to get the impression that the police are homicidal maniacs, well, then, I mean, I guess you do, because the information kind of sends you that way. But it's not, you guys aren't you're not out there, you know, advocating for violence towards the police or anything like that. It's all very peaceful and calm and rational and reasonable. But it is you've made a compelling argument for us changing the way we view policing in this country. So how did you get involved in that?
Sure, man. Thanks for all the kind words. So it's not really that exciting of a story, to be honest. Right around when the first iPad came out, I was excited enough to buy one, saved up a few bucks, and that kind of entered me into the wide world of YouTube. So from that point on, I was interested in activism before that, but that was kind of the catalyst that kind of made me realize and open my eyes to the complexity and severity of some of these issues. So that was like around 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement just kind of started, and I started seeing a lot of police brutality at these protests, and I wasn't familiar with that. That was something that kind of caught me off guard. It might be a little different these days. It seems like we're all so desensitized and acclimated to it. But back then, I instinctively knew that something wasn't right. Like, I knew police shouldn't be assaulting protesters. Even at that point, I didn't really understand the full complexity of the Constitution and what all that meant, all the Bill of Rights and whatnot. But I was curious, so I just kind of followed that path, trying to more or less fit myself into a form of activism that I thought would be effective within the police accountability world. And that led me on the journey of basically a social media empire, I guess, to a certain extent.
Is the right word, because you've got a big following that's very rabid, and they understand what you're trying to do, that you're trying to bring awareness to this. And like you said, it's funny, in 2011, yeah, were we aware of police brutality? Absolutely. I mean, I was at USC when the riots broke out in 92. So I mean, I saw it firsthand, police brutality. But it didn't seem like it was rampant. But like you said, now everyone is probably desensitized to it. So 2011, just starting to, you're a couple years into Obama. We're starting to see some crackdowns. We're starting to see some, the treatment of journalists being locked away. We're starting to see a ramping up of the police. You've got Occupy Wall Street. You've got to find out that the banks are financing police forces to come in there and take care of, boy, did you ever think that you'd wish for a time that we could go back to 2011 with police brutality?
No, actually, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it certainly has. The landscape certainly has changed. It's certainly been more politicized. Certainly a lot more tension within the country about these topics. And that was pre-BLM, right? So. Yeah. There wasn't really like a solid activist base for police accountability activists. There was a few, like Cop Watch, some more like local stuff, maybe with even in the Bay Area. I think that was a big one. But otherwise, it wasn't really a mainstream representation like there is now. So things have certainly changed. Yeah.
Yeah, what's been the response? I know that Facebook hates you, but what has been the response from? Have you had contact from the actual police? Have they?
A few times. We've gotten a few cease and desist letters, from cops who are upset that we're covering a story about them. We actually, speaking of which, actually just interviewed for one of our podcasts today an ex-LAPD officer who lived through the riots, the Rodney King riots. And so, if you're familiar with our podcast or our work, definitely be looking out for that within the next couple of days. We should be dropping that. Yeah. But
I would imagine there's a split within the police force. And obviously they're all a bit different, but you've got the good cops and the bad cops. Now, how that percentage falls is to be determined. I mean, I think everybody, it's department by department, but there is definitely a portion of the police force that are unhinged maniacs, steroided up, no accountability, protecting each other, doing horrible things. And then there's this other percentage, let's call them the good cops, that are stuck inside a system that prevents them from speaking out. It seems like these days, if you're a cop that speaks out against other cops, they go Serpico on you. I mean, they crack down. Is that getting any better, or is there an outlet for these police? Can they go off the record, or without their identities being known, or how does it work for them?
That was actually one of the solutions that our whistleblower police friend actually mentioned, was something more like stringent regulations, more stringent protection for whistleblowers. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I would say that that's certainly a big one. But otherwise, yeah, things are getting better in some ways. Like just recently, Officer Greg Anderson came out and had like a viral media social media video that took off. I mean, it went mega viral, and he was basically a cop that was speaking out about the brutality, speaking out about his fellow officers. Did you happen to catch that one? I
think so. I think so. Was he fired for it?
He was later fired. So in some ways, I think officers are starting to kind of realize that the tide is turning. They're starting to kind of come to the conclusion that they can also use their voice on social media to gain not only some support, but actually, I mean, they could turn into social media celebrities like this gentleman has. I mean, I think there was something along the lines of $70,000 that his GoFundMe ended up generating because people were just so in support of him. So I would say in that sense, there is some hope and light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, police culture seems to have kind of doubled down as of lately. And they seem to have been even more heavy-handed and more, when you're trained to be a hammer, everything's a nail, right? So they're becoming even worse in some regards with a lot of these protesters. And some people, I guess, maybe even within our circles might say it's somewhat justified in cities like Portland and Seattle, but it's kind of ironic that there was these police brutality protests and the cops couldn't even stop brutalizing protesters at these protests, and I think it's only going to escalate things. It's only going to continue to increase the temperature of the boiling pot.
Yeah, we saw that a lot during the Minneapolis riots and things like that. And then people would come out and they'd be protesting against police brutality, and they'd go face to face with the cops, and have some of the cops were kneeling and some of the cops were talking to them. And then the clip, then the police walk away, and then the next day in the exact same spot, they're beating the shit out of people with clubs and batons. And it's like, did we not just try to have this conversation yesterday? You guys couldn't make it a full day without going back to your old ways. Is that a institutional thing? Is that a training situation? We've heard about the training from Israel. I don't know how much of that is actually, is true. I don't know, people, companies from Israel traveling around and training these police. Boy, I mean, I tell you what, if I had to pick one country that I wouldn't want to be in charge of training the police, I think it would be Israel, simply for the fact that they tend to escalate situations instead of de-escalate situations. I know I'm generalizing, of course, but
sure.
But has that training, can we put our finger on what did it to make these cops hyper militarized? I mean, is it the 1033 program that recycled this military equipment back in? Is it the training? Is it the no accountability? Is it everything? I mean,
it's a number. It's all those things, more or less. I mean, all those are attributing factors to the police that we have now. And I'd say the lack of accountability is certainly a magnet for people who do want to do harm. And it's not only the people who were bullies in high schools, but it's also the people who were bullied in high school who have a chip on their shoulder that want to come out and prove themselves. Hey, look, now I have authority. I'm going to make your life a living hell. So I would say that there are a lot of these short-tempered egomaniacs who wear a badge, unfortunately, and because they know how to manipulate the law, they know how to use the law to their advantage when it comes to these brutality incidents, when it comes to some of these shootings. More often than not, they get away with it. I mean, a couple of years back, we covered a study, 96% of the time that cops are caught on camera killing people or committing a crime, they don't get acquitted. Or they don't get indicted. So it's insane, like how crazy it is, and it's rampant, And I would say I'd certainly make the case that it's because of the public sphere. It's because these institutions are all paid with taxation, and there is no real accountability. There is no incentive for accountability. That basically are the same institution. Law enforcement and law and how law is perceived and the judgment of law in this country. So there's a huge conflict of interest there. And a lot of people don't recognize that. And it's like, how are we ever supposed to expect to be fair or have justice if that's the case,
Yeah, I remember growing up in Southern California, we would, you get to be teenage years and you make the trip to Tijuana like everyone does. And people tell you, be careful of the federales there. They'll shake you down. They'll find you. They'll ask for a little bit of money and everything. Okay. We were cognizant of that. Now we go, now in this era, we have civil asset forfeiture and the amount of money that the police are taking from people under, frankly, dubious circumstances. Just the fact that, hey, that laptop looks like a laptop that was reported stolen. We're taking it, you know?
Sure.
So how's that civil asset forfeiture program been used? I mean, for one, I guess it's been used as a funding mechanism, but it's also been like a chip that's divided people, because you get the feeling that that the police are not there to protect and serve you. You get the feeling that they're trying to shake you down and see you as some form of revenue generation. How's that civil asset forfeiture impacted things?
I think it's probably exposed their true colors more than maybe any of these other policies, because it does. It's exactly like you said. I mean, people are starting to kind of see the racket for what it is, you know, and sometimes people will try to ignore that, but anybody paying attention, you know, people who aren't worshiping authority mindlessly, like unfortunately a lot of the country does, see these things, you know, and to us, this is theft. There is no real distinguishable difference, you know, it's theft. So I would say, and of course, you know, to even make it worse, we have primarily the left here that's been protesting pretty consistently since the death of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they've been championing police accountability, but yet many of them are starting to consider, if not have already considered, voting for one of the architects of civil forfeiture, you know, civil asset forfeiture. So it really is all a big mind, you know, fuck, if you don't mind me swearing on this, but it's crazy that people are accepting this, and like, this is, you know, are we not paying attention, or do we just ignore our morals to try to defeat a different candidate? You know, I mean, it is getting a bit messy, but you know, as far as answering your question though, I think in a lot of ways it's probably harmed certain individuals, but in other ways it's probably, like I said, exposed their true colors. And it's becoming more and more clear, I think, to the general public that we're not contracted with these people. These people claim authority over us. These people claim to be producing a product for us, even though we haven't asked for it. Something's kind of weird about that. Something's kind of strange about that. It's almost kind of like they're only here to control us, you know? And I think people are starting to kind of wake up to that. So,
yeah. What does the thin blue line mean to you?
It's a gang flag. It's a gang sign. You know?
Okay, that's what I was thinking too.
That's probably the easiest way to describe it. Some people would say it violates flag code, you know, as well. There's some discrepancy there. People argue constantly about that. If it is true, it's kind of ironic that they can't even follow their own rules and laws, you know, and they're defacing the American flag. But as far as I'm concerned, that's a bootlicker flag. I see somebody who has a sticker of a thin blue line flag on the back of their truck or on their car, and it's instantly like, that person's a bootlicker, like that person worships authority. And I can't really think of any other way of describing it, because that's, in its essence, that's what it is.
Did they see that though as a virtue? As I'm so virtuous that I've got your back, cops. When you go out there trying to keep us safe and protect, you know, all those things that you tell yourself, you're keeping us safe and protect, and I got your back, man. If you get into a situation, I'm going to come and back you. Is that at the surface level? Is that as deep as most people really think about this? Would you suspect?
I would say that's probably even going above and beyond for a lot of these types. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. Like, I'm honestly being genuine and authentic when I say this. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I really do think that the representation of that flag comes from a place of deep indoctrination, and I would say of fear. And the most ironic part about that is that most of these people that you see waving the thin blue line flag happen to be these big, tough, macho guys who drive trucks and whatnot, but they're actually they're the people who are the most afraid of living in a society without police, you know. And I would argue that people like us, people who are for liberty, would value, and society would value, protection and security agencies. So it's not like we don't want to live in a world without police. We just want to live in a world without a monopoly on law enforcement. And I think that's the big distinction that a lot of people either haven't figured out or can't understand. So I think that's where the fear stems from, is that, you know, okay, here's my thin blue line flag support. I can't imagine a world without living. I can't imagine living in a world without police, more or less. And so it's almost kind of like I said, it's a place of indoctrination. You know, they've grown up. I'm sure some people have family bias. Their family was involved with law enforcement in one form or another. And so, I mean, there's a bunch of different factors that kind of all contribute to this support base that police have. But I would say largely it's just they can't imagine a life without a monopoly on law enforcement.
Well, speaking of a monopoly on law enforcement, that opens up the concept of multiple choices for your law enforcement situations. Dale Brown was a speaker at Acapulco, not this year, but last year, talking about privatization of the police force that he put together. Is that a real option? Is that how would that work out? Is that a community specific thing? Do we find ourselves going down the path of South Africa, where only the rich have private security, their own security team? Do we really want to live like that? So how does a private security force, how does it work? Can it coexist with a public police force? Like, what's the possibilities of something like that?
So I would say it can't only work. I would say it's probably our only legitimate and real solution, to be completely honest. And yeah, Dale Brown is a good friend of mine. Actually, don't ever mention the words of privatizing police around him, because he gets triggered about the idea of privatizing, even though he's a private entity who does security and protection services within Detroit.
What does he consider himself then? I mean, how does he... Because to me, that was like the easiest way to call it privatized police. But
you could ask him that, and you'll get a few paragraphs back in response. Okay. It's really hard to distinguish exactly where he sits in that spectrum or on that scale. But at its essence, yeah, that's exactly what he is, and it's proven to be valuable for the communities that he serves. So, like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, I think that's the only real solution. As far as I'm concerned, this all boils down. And when I say this, I mean the police violence issue, this epidemic that's happening within our country, that's been happening for years now. The only real solution is to look at it in an economic form. So the reason why police right now have zero accountability is because there's no mechanism stopping them from not. I know that sounds kind of bland and maybe simple, but when you're funded by taxation, when you're funded by a gun in the room, when somebody is claiming coercion over you and saying, okay, you have to pay these funds, that doesn't give an entity or a firm much incentive to try to be effective, efficient, accountable, or to ever change. So to answer your question, I personally don't believe that it would be something that only the rich can afford. And I know that's a typical response when people hear about the idea of privatizing police. And to be completely honest, I don't even use the words privatizing police. That word has such negative connotation attached to it, privatized, that it almost is something that just closes the door to people's open minds. And as soon as you say that, it's over. What I call it is decentralized community protection and service companies. And for whatever reason, that seems a little more palatable to people. So, that's basically what it is. It's decentralized. They're community-based. So it would be communities who are the people who are organizing together to decide on what firms they would want to, go ahead and contract with. And I would assume there would be multiple types of firms who are interested in this type of business, much like Dale Brown. So the market in its basic form doesn't ever mean that it's exclusive to one class in society. There's always going to be different producers that produce different value goods for society. So much like there's, let's just say, any type of name brand, let's say Versace shoes or slippers or whatever, there's going to be slippers that you could buy at Payless, even though they just went out. You know what I'm saying? Some of these cheaper shoe stores or whatever. Yeah. There's always going to be different incentives for different producers to provide different levels of a product. So I don't personally see it being like a huge issue where like only the rich could be able to afford these things. And in fact, even in a place like Detroit, that is poverty stricken in a lot of areas, Dale Brown is able to use some of that funding that he gets, I think through an additional fee that he charges his customer base, to provide the same services to some of the poorer neighborhoods. So, and not to mention, I mean, if you look at any type of graphs or statistics showing how donations and charities have been escalating over the past decade or so, even when taxes have continued to rise, even when there's uncertainty due to a number of different issues within the economy with the pandemic, people are still donating. People are still giving to charity. So I'm hard pressed to believe that people wouldn't donate or try to somehow give to these communities if they weren't able to provide protection services for themselves. Of course, that all sounds well and good. Who knows if that's actually what would happen? We're just talking theory here. So, and I think that's the best we could do. You know, if we don't have like a map or a blueprint as what the future could look like, then we're not going to be getting anywhere. And I think that's where, when you began this, you know, why we're so different from a lot of other police accountability organizations, is because we're not just screaming, fuck the police. We're not just screaming, fuck 12, all cops are bastards, all that shit. Like, we really want to logically understand what's going on here. And we also want to provide that information to our audience so they could have an understanding of what we could do to make things better and what solutions could actually look like. It's easy to get ramped up. It's easy to get angry and upset and be very emotional about these topics. But ultimately, in the end of the day, saying fuck the police or putting on NWA fuck the police is not doing much. You know what I mean? Right. So we need a road map. We need blueprints of what this is going to look like. So once again, I'm not saying I know for sure all the answers. I'm not saying that I know if this would work for certain, but I do know that people respond to incentives, and I do know that public policing has been failing us for 60 plus years.
Yeah, it really has. It seems that, you know, when they went from the nice police officer with the blue uniform and the funny blue hat, who was walking around, you know, saying, "Oh, your apple pie smells good, Mrs. Smith," and all that stuff. Now, through that 1033 program, with this material has been recycled in from the military to the police force for only the cost of shipping and handling, which is a generous offer that Bill Clinton offered them and started in 1997. Now we're seeing tactical gear, you know, even pre-corona, the masks pulled up high, the helmets, goggles, camoed or all dark, or you know, submachine guns, flashbang grenades. I mean, when you are armed like a soldier, you look like a soldier, you're trained like a soldier. At some point, is it that surprising that you think one of these guys is going to act like a soldier too? And is that not just the equipment that was recycled in, but a lot of these guys recycle themselves from military to the police? And is the same mentality that you have walking the streets of Fallujah really the best mentality to have walking the streets of Minneapolis?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is the standing army that the founding fathers warned of, you know. I mean, there's no like gentle way of putting that, all while many on the right are over here licking boots and waving these thin blue line flags, you know. And it's like, you're supposed to be people who actually valued and respected the Constitution, and here you are supporting the goddamn standing army, you know. So yeah. I mean, I would argue that the psychology also changed when the 1033 program was implemented, and police culture in general. It's just continued to not only attract the worst of the worst, and when I say that, I don't mean just people who are the bullies in high school, like I alluded to earlier. I mean, a lot of these people have deep psychological issues where it's sexual abuse, it's pedophilia, it's child porn rings, all within the department. These are a lot of the aspects that the mainstream media does not talk about. I mean, it's great that we're shining a light on the racism aspect of this stuff, but there's a whole other dirty, dark side to law enforcement, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, to kind of keep on track here, I would say that police culture in general, I mean, there's just profound debauchery, and almost, you know, they just know that they're unaccountable. They know that they could get away with just about anything, and it's maybe gotten a hair better as of recently, but I wouldn't say that there's been any real significant change. And
we've got sort of the piggyback off of that is this epidemic, like you said, never gets mentioned on the nightly news, of spousal abuse that happens with police. What are the stats showing that? I know that that's never going to show up, in the nightly news. It's a closeted situation. It's a closeted situation for a lot of people, not just having to do with police, but it's a deeply private and embarrassing and scary situation. And you get a lot of people clamming up on it. But then if you add on top of that the fact that the person doing it to you is a police officer, and you know that they work with a bunch of other maniacs that will keep that quiet. I mean, is this not sending the wrong message to spouses around the country that that thin blue line will protect them for what they do to you as well?
Yeah, isn't it ironic that the thin blue line flag is black and blue?
Yeah.
And to continue on what you were saying there, statistics show that 1 in 4 women in the U.S. are victims of domestic abuse, but those numbers jump to 1 in 2 if they're married to a cop. So I'm sure you've seen that roughly 40% of law enforcement families have some type of domestic abuse. Now, we covered that story back in 2014, so it's been a while. And I think at that time, even the study that we were citing was a bit old. So who knows what those numbers are now? Like you mentioned, Charlie, who knows how many people have the correct numbers, because this time, a lot of times it doesn't get reported. Who knows if their wives, it's not always just the female in the relationship, but who knows how often it does get reported, because there are consequences, like you mentioned, So we've made countless memes trying to warn people about dating police. Like, here's 4 reasons why you shouldn't date a cop, stuff like that. So we've tried to do our part, giving the red flag, waving the red flag, giving the heads up to the general public that it's probably not in your best interest. It sounds like a great idea. You feel like you're going to have, all the benefits that come with being married to a cop, and maybe some type of protection and immunity from the law. Even in some cases, we've seen plenty of family members have a lot of the same privileges that cops have, the blue privilege. But ultimately, there's a lot of risk involved too, because who are you going to go tell? Who are you going to run to if you do get abused? Are you going to be able to call the town that's, one town over? Are they going to be receptive? Are they friends with the local police department? Do they know your husband? So there's just a lot of issues with it. And it's just another red flag. It's just another sign of a decaying institution, that really it needs to change. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of this incremental reform that politicians have been kind of trying to appease their constituents rolling out. I don't really see it doing much, Yeah.
So is this a police union situation? I mean, can we put a lot of this on the strength and inflexibility of the police union when it comes to actually doing something about the problems? Clearly, if we know that they've got problems, then they know they have problems. But is there no incentive for the police unions to change things up? It seems to me like, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a part of a union, but sometimes the strength in numbers is used as a way to bury issues that come up and they don't get addressed because the union is so strong. I mean, it doesn't strike me. I don't know enough about the police union to know if they're actually doing something about this or if they're just sort of paying it lip service.
Probably more of the latter. And I would say that there's probably an element of denial even within their own ranks, and of course the incentive to turn the blind eye, because ultimately the less attention that your department or your union could accrue, the better. So I don't have any specific examples to speak on or to kind of explain my knowledge on this topic, but I would assume that it is. And, we saw just a few months ago, right after the George Floyd, God, I can't remember the name of, we've seen it twice. We've seen it a handful of times now where, these police union representatives come out and they basically say, why are you guys picking on us? we're not the thugs here. You guys are the thugs. And it's just like, really? Like you can't internalize any of this. You don't have any type of empathy. And that's part of the problem, is that they oftentimes can't admit that they're wrong. They have no incentive to admit that they're wrong, and they try to spin things. I mean, constantly. That's like part of their MO, is to not try to actually give a valid explanation that I think the community, the public really wants, but it more or less covers their ass with legalese, and trying to, try to figure out legal ways to explain things. And if that means that it's morally correct, that's a whole different story,
Yeah. Can you give me sort of like a clearer understanding of what qualified immunity means? We hear that. We've been hearing that a lot lately, but I don't know the depths of it.
I'm not an expert on that. Here, let's Google it.
Okay.
Just for the sake of trying to be efficient here. Judiciary created doctrine that shields government officials from being personally liable for constitutional violations. So, I mean, I feel like this is one of the many laws that work in police's favor. And when they have these legal protections, that's just more ammo in their own personal arsenal of knowing that they can act in illegal manner, in an immoral way. So I do believe that is probably more of a focus and target that activists should have, rather than, let's say, defunding. I do understand the defunding aspect because, like we were just talking about, there's a lot of, military equipment. There's tons of advantages that police have over us when it comes to the funding that they have, whether it be drones or whatever. There's hundreds of examples that we could go down. But when it comes to what I think is actually flying over the target and dropping bombs, is more of the trying to get rid of the qualified immunity. And along that, I would say, and I've even made a video about this, the liability insurance, the individual liability insurance for cops would also be another great way of trying to incentivize more accountability within law enforcement. Although that is more government, that's more laws, that's more regulations. So I would say I'm not exactly as in favor of that as just trying to get away from the qualified immunity law. That seems to make more sense to drop that first. But I do see there being incentives, especially by some of these insurance companies, for the liability insurance. They would act within their own interests to try to make sure that cops have more training, have better equipment, there's higher standards and whatnot. So there is some utility there. There is some value in that idea. But I would say, trying to get rid of qualified immunity would be one of the first things to work on.
Yeah, I live in Denver now, and Governor Polis just changed that to end qualified immunity in Colorado, and people freaked out. I mean, half the people were really thrilled about it, the people that were paying attention to what was going on with the police force. But the police, of course, were like, this is, how dare you do that? We're right. Exploring our options for where we can move out of state, to go to different states and everything.
Right.
Well, that's not the response of an innocent person, right there. It's like, hey, listen. You're taking away my ability to violate somebody's constitutional rights. How dare you? I'm going to go to a state that will allow that. It's like, you're kind of proving everybody's point here with this when you have that reaction. I think the only acceptable reaction would be, great. Okay, great. We're not doing that anyway. So change whatever laws you want. But how ironic would it be that that in order to get actual results, you have to lean on the insurance industry that would stand to lose lots of money from paying out on these settlement cases, that they would then say, it looks like if we're going to do this, you guys are going to have your body cameras on at all times. You're never going to be able to take that off. I'm going to have to make sure that you submit to drug tests and all the things, health tests, exactly. Hey, if you're going to go, if I'm, applying for health insurance, I got to have a doctor's appointment. They got to check me out, make sure I'm not, shooting speedballs and stuff like that, because steroids. And steroids is a huge, we kind of joke about that, but I mean, if people don't think steroids are a problem with a cop, look at that gorilla that they moved into Jeffrey Epstein's cell. He was an ex-cop. That dude who had killed 4 guys during a drug deal, that guy was a monster. But it is, we kind of joke about the steroids with the police. But hey, roid rage is real.
Right.
Cops using steroids is an epidemic. It's really happening.
Oh yeah.
Proud, they're not shy about doing that. It seemed to me that that it's a shame that if the people want something, we all want the cops to behave better and turn your cameras on and all this stuff. Yeah, whatever. But it'll take the insurance companies to make that actually happen, or the threat of hey, we're taking we're removing qualified immunity. That seems to me like just the baseline level thing that you would do is the qualified immunity argument would get settled, and therefore you would have that. But where do you? Let's just say you had a magic wand. You could do 3 things real quick and to improve the policing that we currently see without disbanding it, without dissolving the police force, which I don't think we're advocating for. But what are some of the low-hanging fruit that you would take care of right off the bat that would show marked improvement in the way the public interact with the police?
Sure. Yeah. So aside from decentralizing police, like we had mentioned, because
decentralizing police,
I'm not quite certain that public police and private police, I don't really quite know what that looks like. So I can't really estimate as of right now without abolishing police, that being like a feasible option. But I would say that liability insurance would be at the top of the list, ending qualified immunity. I would say also creating a blacklist, like a national blacklist for cops who have violated people's rights. Unfortunately, that's another epidemic in itself, is that when cops are fired, and oftentimes they're fired when they should be arrested and actually charged, but instead they're just fired. When they're fired, they just simply wait a certain amount of time and pick up a job at a different law enforcement agency down the road. And this happens all the time. And then they get into more trouble, cause more crime, do more illegal activities, and they get fired, and they keep jumping all over the map. And this happens frequently. So I would say that would probably be at the top of the list as well. In fact, if I had a few more seconds here, and if I knew we were talking specifically about police brutality and police violence today, I would have brought it up already. But I do have a meme that I've created for Police the Police that lists a bunch of different solutions that you could do personally, that your community could do, and that you could also do politically if you wanted to go that route. Of course, it'll take me a few seconds here to bring it up, so I won't bother. But certainly go through our archives on the Police Instagram or Facebook, and we're constantly talking about solutions. That's actually one of the bigger topics that we try to make a forefront of our organization. In fact, we even have a tab on our website for solutions. So, it's ironic. No matter how much we try to plug solutions, we talk about them, there's always some jackass bootlicker, so what are your solutions? What do you propose? And it's like, I've been talking about this endlessly. But so I'm all for promoting solutions. And like you had mentioned, it's a lot of people aren't ready for the idea of abolishing police for one reason we've already explained. They just can't imagine a life without a monopoly on law enforcement. And a lot of people don't even have conceptualize or understand that law enforcement is a monopoly. So I think it is important that we advocate for some of these changes, whether they be through politics or whether it just happens to be stuff that we're doing in our community, trying to teach, let's say, the homeless their rights and how to apply them when police approach them, or stuff like that, just creating community cop watch groups. Another big phenomenon is the First Amendment audits. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
No.
Oh, wow. Yeah. See, I wasn't either until about maybe a year and a half ago, but apparently it's a pretty big community, and it's basically morphed from the cop watching groups to actively, instead of following around cops at certain traffic stops, now what they're called is auditors. They take their cameras, they're armed with their rights. They know their rights pretty well, most of them, and they go to different public or federal buildings and actually film police where they're legally allowed to film, do the First Amendment. And a lot of times cops will get up in their face. They'll, end up, proving exactly why they're out there auditing in the first place, because they don't actually know the laws. They're just there to more or less, be a bully to people. So that's a whole nother phenomenon in itself. And yeah, there's a lot of really active auditors out there. I would say the auditing community is actually more active than the cop watching community at this point. I could probably name a few of them: Joshua Martinez, James Freeman. There's a bunch. High Desert Community Watch. There's a bunch. So definitely check that out. Just type in First Amendment audits into YouTube and you'll see a bunch of channels, a bunch of videos. And they're great because it really exposes and really highlights that cops not only don't know the law, but they're actually so short-tempered that they'll even get confrontational and escalate situations on camera, even when they know they're being filmed. And of course, this works out great for the auditors because the videos go viral. And if they've monetized their channel, then they're making bucks, there's a few bucks from this. If the cop happens to violate their rights, then guess what? It's a lawsuit and you have it all on camera. So it's kind of a win-win for these people who are auditors. And I really don't, there's a lot of awesome civil disobedience and activism that you could do. And I feel like that's one of the braver ones, is actually confronting these people in their lion's den, and putting a camera in their face and basically telling them they don't know the law. So I would definitely highly suggest for not only yourself, Charlie, but for your audience to check those guys out.
Yeah, for sure. I've watched some of those videos. Those are fascinating. The ones that really get me pissed off, they all do, frankly. But the ones where they're going through like agricultural checkpoints, like the checkpoint on the way from LA to Vegas. There's one, and they're like, "Do you have any fruit in your car?" Every single one of us that has gone through one of those checkpoints, it's like, what the fuck are you stopping us for? This is retarded. Like, what are we doing here? You're just going to look and that's it. So what do we have the right to do and not do in a situation like that?
Yeah. I guess different people will tell you different things, but you don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to produce any ID. Now, does that mean that the Border Patrol agent or the officer who's pulled you over for this traffic stop will want to adhere to that? No, probably not. Most likely, they're going to probably escalate the situation. You catch one who's had enough trauma, who has a big enough ego and short enough temper, and they might even smash out your window and drag you out of the car. That's not unheard of. That happens pretty frequently in, the home of the USSA, land of the free. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's maybe not in the best interest, but I would suggest always filming, first of all, always stating on camera, on video, that you don't consent to searches. That's going to help legally down the road if anything happens. But what that's also going to do is give the impression to the officer that you actually know what you're talking about, that you actually know the law, that you know your rights. And a lot of times that could deter them. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, though, it's always a roll of the dice. You never know if an officer is having a good day, if he got late in the morning, or if he's, been 2 years without having sexual activities, and he's just, a hard ass, and he's depressed and miserable, and he wants to take it out on you. Like, that's certainly possible. Yeah. If that's the case, it's probably best for you to try to de-escalate the situation. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a roll of the dice, because you can tell an officer that you're filming him, and prior to that, he could be reasonable. But once he knows you're filming him, he could also lose his mind. So with all that said, you can apply your rights. I very much advocate that people do, because the less we flex that muscle, the more it's going to go into atrophy, so it's something that we need to do as a society. But at the border, if you are pulled over and have to go into secondary, they're probably going to try to scare you. There's probably going to be multiple officers that come over, but legally you don't have to provide any ID. Legally, you don't have to tell them where you're coming from. And like you mentioned, a lot of these border patrol stops are so far away from the border that it seems unreasonable and almost seems kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yet, there's thousands of people that go through them every day and don't think twice.
Yeah.
So,
what's the Free Thought Project for people that don't know? It seems like the happier, smilier face of this, as it were. Policing the police is like these fucking police. The Free Thought Project is kind of the different thing.
Sure. Yeah. So I am founder of Police to Police. I am co-founder with a guy named Macroaggressions, who's been my partner for 7 years now. He's the editor-in-chief. And the Free Thought Project is more along the lines of government accountability, whereas Police to Police just strictly focuses on police accountability. So that varies. There's a lot of things that fall underneath that umbrella for government accountability. Right now, and especially since the censorship has been so rampant across social media, we focused more on police accountability because basically these, quote, fact checkers could spin anything and twist your words into being something that's incorrect. So a lot of these hot topics that happen to associate to government accountability, they're so politicized that it's just almost a hornet's nest, like kicking a hornet's nest, trying to give a subjective opinion about. So we do op-eds. We also do just covering straight up news. But the Free Thought Project is the third narrative that you're not going to get from the left-right media. So a lot of times that means wading in waters that are controversial. And once again, the fact checkers aren't huge on that. They want to try to put their thumb down on the information that we're sharing because a lot of times it's political for them too. It's these fact checkers. There's no such thing as an unbiased or objective fact checker, right? We all have our bias inherently one way or another if we realize it or not. So the Free Thought Project does try to focus on that type of information, but we've had to scale it back a little bit, unfortunately, for right now. So ultimately, though, government accountability, like I said, that's a wide spectrum of things. That's, watching the banks. That's talking about things even like geoengineering, government-sponsored geoengineering, stuff like that, which, of course, gets us labeled conspiracy theorists or whatever, but everything, if you ever look at our topics and our headlines with the Free Thought Project, they always link back to being government accountability of somehow.
Well, I've got a new book coming out with Jeff Berwick. We've got, 400 plus footnotes. I'm sure that I've got at least a half a dozen of them from Macroaggressions. I mean, if you're writing about crooked government and things like that, you're going to come across his work. At least I am. I'm going to come across his work. It seems to be, it's, activist post or right. I'm finding it. It's there. I always, whenever there's an article that I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm like, God, of course Matt wrote it. Of course,
Absolutely. I can't say enough good things about Matt. I couldn't have asked for a better business partner. He's a beast. He's an animal. He's a workhorse. I mean, he writes at least 3 to 5 articles every day. And as we both do, work 7 days a week. But yeah, he's probably written over 5,000 articles. I would say that might be on the higher end, conservatively over 4,500 for sure. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can't say enough about him. You could also find his work, his writing all over the internet on a bunch of different websites. Like you mentioned, everybody aggregates our information, but a lot of it stems from Matt's mind.
Yeah. Well, tell everyone where they can find you. How can they support you, support your work, share it, get involved? I mean, I think a lot of people are probably listening and saying, I like what he's saying, but can I be a part of it? Can I get, how can I help? How can I do this?
Absolutely. So try to make this as brief as possible, but in October 2018, both Facebook and Twitter both conspired to remove our accounts and pages on the same day. I don't really know of many other organizations besides maybe Alex Jones where different social media platforms came together to remove accounts and pages literally within hours of each other. But when that happened, we ended up losing 6 million fans. We had a huge following that was reduced down to 0 with a click. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, right now we're basically rebuilding. We're trying to bring on the writers that we had. We're trying to bring back a couple of the social media guys that we had. So we need as much help as possible. The ad revenue that we're getting is sinking. It's crashing. Unfortunately, Facebook and Google are taking a huge portion of that market. So we're having a hard time. We're still hanging on, but we could certainly use help with a subscription. We have a subscription feature on our website at the very top. If you click membership or support free thought, both of those tabs will take you to subscription. $3 a month helps us out, and you get an ad-free version of the site. We also do donations. If you just want to do like a one-time $10 donation or something like that, it all helps. It all adds up. We also have a Patreon. If you can't help us financially, that's fine. I understand. You could just share our information, share our links. We're on a number of different social media platforms. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. A whole slew of smaller social media platforms, which I'd be happy to share with you. But most of our information is at thefreethoughtproject.com. We don't post videos and memes there, but all of our articles are at our website. Otherwise, just follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We post fresh content every day, videos, memes. We also have a podcast, which, like I had mentioned earlier in the show, we're going to be releasing another podcast tomorrow. And also all that stuff that I just mentioned goes for Police the Police as well. So we're on Police the Police Instagram, we're on Police the Police Facebook, Float, Minds, MeWe, Tumblr, SoMe, Masthead, Gab. I mean, all of these, it's crazy. We've really had to spread the net wide to be able to make ends meet and just to get our information out there after all this censorship. So yeah, please help us out.
Got to decentralize. That's Jason Bassler, everybody. Check out his work. Support him. It's great. Get on Facebook. He posts hilarious shit all day long. It's really the best. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.